Okay, if you're running 8 times a kilometer with 60 seconds rest and you're wondering whether to add more reps or whether to make those reps longer, here's the thing. Neither of those decisions matters. Adding a 9th and then 10th rep or stretching the reps out to 2 kilometers doesn't change what the session actually is. There are 2 things to do, and once you see them, your question answers itself. Let me show you exactly what I mean. I got this question from Leandro. Hey Lee, great videos as always, love your content. I'm about 3 months away from my marathon and I usually do my interval sessions on Wednesdays. Good man. I have a question, I'd love to get your opinion on it. Right now, I'm running 8 times a kilometer intervals with 60 seconds recovery. For marathon training, would it be better to keep increasing the number of reps, for example, 10 times a kilometer, or should I start increasing the interval distance instead? I'd be grateful for any advice. Start with what the session actually is, because it isn't fixed. You might have heard me talk about 8 times a kilometer with 60-second rest as a VO2 max session. It is. It absolutely can be. But 8 times a kilometer can also be a great threshold session. Same structure on paper, but different stimulus. And what decides that? Exactly how hard you run those reps. If you do 8 times a kilometer in zone 1 and zone 2, conversational, it's a great easy run. If you run the reps at a strong controlled effort and get to a point after a few sessions where 60 seconds feels like just enough, and I would start with 4 times a kilometer, then 6 times a kilometer, then 8 times a kilometer, then it should be somewhere near an 8 out of 10 perceived effort and a 9 out of 10 towards the end of the session. It's not only a great stimulus for increasing your VO2 max, you're working just under your VO2 max, and so you're able to accumulate volume, much more volume, at exactly where you need to be. Now, in order to make that manageable, not just start with 4 times a kilometer, but you might want to start with longer rest. It depends also on how experienced you are, not just with marathon training or distance running training, but in this specific case, how familiar your body is in the recent past, the last 2 to 4 weeks of running fast. The biggest mistake that I see of runners running between 2:30 or 3:30 for the marathon is that they run these reps too fast. And so what's happening is they can't accumulate enough volume in order to get that improvement, to get that super compensation from the session. What I also see is, okay, we're in marathon training now, and so I've got to run fast in those midweek intervals. I've got to go fast, and in the last 4 weeks, the last 3 months, nothing fast. And so it's too much force, too much load on the body, and they get set back. How can we move forward if you're sidelined? Now, the number 1 indicator of marathon success is your lactate threshold, and how I measure it, or how we measure it, your 1 hour race pace. And of course, that makes complete sense. The fastest you can run an hour will correlate with the fastest you can run for 3 hours or 3.5 hours. In the same way that your half marathon, if you pace it right, the half marathon will be a pretty good indication of how fast you can run a marathon. So if we run that 8 times a kilometer, and we could do the first 4 reps at marathon effort and the second 4 reps at that 1 hour effort, you'd be mixing up approximately 6 and 7 perceived effort out of 10. And you'd be developing your threshold, and then you'd be able to add more volume as long as you were very honest with yourself about how much that was taken out of the body, and you would be recovered fast and full enough, ready for that weekend long run, where you were going to again attack the specific requirements of the marathon. Remember, he's in marathon training. Now here's the key, and a very important point, and once I got this right, then all of a sudden I removed all the stuff in the week that wasn't serving what I was trying to achieve in a race. And my marathon time flew forward. And now I help runners to do exactly the same, to have these huge breakthroughs. And you've got to ask yourself, what training stimulus am I after? What am I trying to achieve with this session? And always ask yourself that before a session. What is the purpose of this session? So what are we trying to achieve? And when are we trying to achieve it? So he's 3 months away from his marathon, and he's probably got a number in mind, but we don't know the time and we don't know anything about him. But let's assume that he's aiming for a 3-hour marathon. And the most important thing to him on that day is to bank a number that starts with 2 hours and something. He doesn't care whether it's 2 hours 59.59 or 2 hours 50. He wants to run his first sub 3. The VO2 max needed for a sub 3 marathon is actually quite low. And so for most runners with 3 months to go, and this is exactly the same for me, I'd be working on my threshold, to push my threshold up. I say up, but I mean, let's push the graph to the right, meaning faster at your first and second threshold and more efficient in zone 3 and into zone 4, where we're going to spend the marathon. So what you'll find is if you figure out, okay, what are my limiting factors? What am I trying to do? When is it? It might be that the work is actually a lot more manageable than you thought, and just as important, a lot less risk. So if we're doing plenty of subthreshold work, we can stack plenty of volume. And so back to, again, the question, what's the main indicator of marathon success? Your lactate turn point, or how we calculate it, your 1 hour race pace. So I would be spending time at the effort ranges that I was going to use in the marathon. So setting off at 4-5, getting to halfway 6 out of 10, and then gradually ramping up to 7 and then 8 out, and then emptying the tank. Most runners are not ready for that first part, because unless we train it, you're not going to be efficient at it. And this is why it's important for me as a coach to have multiple data points in your training program to see how you're moving forward over the weeks and months, to a point where I can put you on the start line with a race card that tells you exactly how to pace each segment of 5 within your marathon. It is very freeing to know that you're getting the best out of your marathon, and very freeing to learn how to pace a marathon. So to answer your question, in addition to those 8 times a kilometer, which might become 6 times a kilometer, it might become 12 times a kilometer, depends what the limiting factors, what your limiting factors are, I would add then something very specific to what I was trying to achieve in my marathon race. And I would work it out in a way, and I work it out in a way for my athletes that it's repeatable. But most important, you know exactly for that, for example, 8 times a kilometer, exactly how hard to run them based on what you need. I could easily say, okay, yeah, add more, or double the length of the rep and do 5 times 2 kilometers. But that's what most generic plans, and I have great books in front of me, behind me, upstairs, they will all give you a plan for a 5K, 10K, half marathon, marathon, but until you learn exactly what's holding you back, it's all guesswork. And so can it work? Yes, absolutely it can work. But in the same way that somebody who makes a New Year's resolution to themselves and they want to lose weight will usually lose weight anyway, because it's on their mind. They're enthusiastic about it. They're motivated about it. It's the start of the year. We've seen them in the gym. They'll be at the gym for January and half of February, and then it's free again, because either the habit has dropped off and that initial motivation never turned into habit, or they've not seen the gains. And it's my opinion that if I'm training towards something, I want the best possible results based on the time I have available and the resources available to me. If you're training for New York, Chicago, Berlin, or 1,000 other marathons or half marathons from mid-September onwards, and you want to get the absolute best out of your training and the day, and you're a positive person, you've got the work ethic, you've got the discipline, you're not looking for accountability, then get in touch by booking a call in the link in the description.